All right, we have the last panel, and then we were ready for lunch and everything. How was till this moment? Tell me the truth. Oh my gosh. That was sad, guys. All right. Okay, next panel, very interesting. We have a couple of great guys because we have the founder of one of the most interesting and important tech conference in the world, with Paddy Cosgrave. He came here. I think it's the first time that I see him in an event in Italy, so I never saw him before. And the co-founder of Tuenti, probably you remember about him, Zaryn Dentzel, also was last year at TechCrunch. So let's give them really a huge welcome. Paddy Cosgrave and Zaryn Dentzel. Here we are, guys. Hello, man. Everything okay? Hi, Paddy. Welcome. All right, take a seat. All right, guys. No, I didn't like that. Okay, this side, make your best noise at 3. 1, 2, 3. This side, same thing. 1, 2, 3. A huge welcome for these two amazing guests. 1, 2, 3. That's it. Sorry, guys, but sometimes, you know, in Italy, we have to do our warm-up. Okay, so where we start from? It was fantastic because we say, what are we going to talk about? We'll see, you know. Paddy say, we'll see. Okay, great. But you have so many interesting things to say. Okay, I start with Paddy because I'm very, very curious about how you did it, you know, with Founders Web Summit. And also for Italians, it's very interesting because when you started in Ireland, I thought, it's impossible. You know, this guy, he can't do amazing things there. And in Italy, often we say, how can we do amazing things in our country? So I think your experience could be very interesting. Can you recap for people that maybe doesn't know you, just, you know, your story of the last couple of years, which was phenomenal?
So it's all very flattering. He's exaggerating to make me seem better than I really am. So in 2010, I organized 2 events in Ireland for the first time. One was called Founders, brought together the founders of 150, of the kind of fastest growing tech companies from around the world. So guys like Jack Dorsey behind Twitter and Square, Chad Hurley behind things like YouTube, Nicholas Enstrom behind Skype, and so on and so forth. And in the foreground to that was a private event, invite only. I ran a small startup conference for about 500 people. And since 2010, that small event called the Web Summit has grown from 500 people, all from just Ireland, to this October will be somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 people from more than 100 countries from around the world. In 2010, we had 3 startups exhibiting. This October, in 6 weeks, 5 weeks' time, there'll be maybe 910 startups. That's as much as we can fit, exhibiting from all over the world. 30 from Israel, 37 from Berlin alone. So that's kind of the scale of the event.
Impressive. But can I ask you a straight question? I mean, in the beginning, what did you do? You just call Jack Dorsey and say, hey, Jack, I'm doing an event. Would you like to come? Or what was your approach to bring such a great guest?
So I think the only thing that I did that I think was different to most people is I avoided sending emails and picking up phones. Right. I just figured out that pretty much all of these guys, whether it was Chad Hurley or Jack Dorsey, their Skype name was probably Jack Dorsey or Jack.Dorsey. So I'd add them on Skype, where nobody was adding them on Skype.
Genius,
people were emailing them. And I just send them a message, and they go, yeah, sure, I'll do a Skype call. And I would force them to do video, because when somebody does a video, it's a very human thing, and it makes it very, very difficult for them to say no, because they're getting to know you and they're seeing your face. If they get an email, if you get an email and somebody invites you to a party, it's so easy to say no. If it's on a phone, you don't know them, so it's easy to say no. But over 15 minutes face-to-face, we're all so human. That's why we're here. We're here to meet each other. Despite LinkedIn, despite Facebook, despite everything else, we still need and want to meet each other. So that was kind of the key. So that was one strategy, get them on Skype. And then the other strategy was not to tell them much about the conference, but to focus on the fact that there would be a pub crawl in Dublin, and we'd go to all the best pubs. And there's people here that were there at the first event, and they can attest to the fact that it was the pub crawl that was probably the most exciting part, not the conference.
Cool. But that's great. I mean, first is a great strategy, because to contact them, and also you were adding value from maybe the entertainment point of view, but then you get everyone involved in the conference. So super cool. And thanks for sharing, because it's very interesting tip. I will start to Skype everyone now when I have to invite them. Zaryn, Tuenti. Successful, probably we spoke about Tuenti last year. I was curious about one thing. You launched it in Spain, right? So Spain is very similar to Italy. And tomorrow, for instance, we'll have also Lucas Carne from Privalia, another huge success. So how did you do that? I mean, why did you decide to go in Spain instead of trying, Silicon Valley or somewhere else?
Yeah, so a lot of people in Spain ask me that question. And firstly, I think, well, what is an American doing in Europe? And of all of Europe, what are you doing in Spain? That's got to be the last place where you can start a startup.
Yeah.
Coming from the United States and having started another company on the West Coast, I didn't feel that there were many barriers really to start anything here. I think that most of the barriers that exist in Europe and in Southern Europe in particular, they're sociological, they're psychological, they're cultural. There aren't really that many things stopping you from creating a company. And I think when you look at the dynamics of starting a company today, and you look at what's important, and you look at the value of human capital, you look at the cost and the access to that human capital, it's actually much more difficult and much more costly to find, attract, and maintain and retain really good talent in Silicon Valley versus Spain or Italy, right? And so I think that if you understand that, there's been a massive change in globalization, digitalization of economy, you can actually, at less cost, attract and retain better people in places like Spain. And so I was able to do that. This is back in 2006.
Right.
In 2006 it was possible. Today it's way more possible, right? So things have only become easier and more connected and more globalized. So I think it's actually a really good place to start companies. And that's one of the things we talk about a lot in Spain. That's one of the reasons why we're working on a startup manifesto for Europe and trying to promote starting companies in Europe. That I think that the biggest challenge facing Europe is psychological more than anything else.
Give me a second. We just go in that topic. But do you think also acquiring traffic probably is cheaper in Spain than, I live in UK. And in UK, if you launch something, when you have to buy traffic, it's very expensive. So to get a user, conversion rate maybe are lower. Do you think was also an important point for Tuenti?
Yeah, so I think each company is different, certainly. And I think when you talk to Lucas from Privalia, in their e-commerce model and the way that they acquire traffic, I think he can have a very good answer for specifically how you do that. In my area, which has been more social media and starting the Spanish social network, we actually generated all our traffic organically. We were part of that big first boom in the internet. Remember when your inbox was full of email, getting spammed? So and so invited you to the network. That's what we were doing. So we had a very low cost of acquisition actually. I think that you have two challenges. I think on one side acquisition costs can be lower. But on the other side as well, and I think this is definitely consistent between Spain and Italy, you don't have the same advanced digital economy that you have in the UK. Payment online and the fluency of using services on the mobile web and on the desktop web in the UK are just, years ahead of Spain and Italy. It's a very advanced economy. So if you create something that works in the UK, I think it can really get a quick uptick and it can grow very quickly because there's such a powerful digital economy. Whereas in Spain and Italy, sometimes it can take a little bit longer, and sometimes you're going to have to maybe do some more traditional marketing to get out there and get that initial growth. But I think once you do have success in Spanish and Italian markets, I think it's very easy to maintain a market leadership position. That's why you have some very strong internet companies in Italy and Spain.
Right. Guys, you both doing for different side a lot of good stuff for Europe, because basically you create an amazing conference, you working on this project with European Commission. We talk a lot about how can Europe become more competitive compared with Silicon Valley. So it was, for the last 15 years, I remember, every conference people try to understand if there's a way to compete. And obviously Silicon Valley is a world apart. But what's your recipe, Paddy, to try to get Europe advanced? I mean, there are a lot of pieces to put together. In your experience, you see so many startups, so many speakers, so many investors. What's your recipe?
Well, I think there's been a dramatic change globally in 2 decades. So, 20 years ago, the average age of a S&P 500 company was something close to 50 years, and in 20 years, it's gone down to something like 17 years or 18 years. It's incredible, and it could come down even further. So, what does that mean? That means that companies can come out of nowhere, grow to an incredible scale in a very short space of time. And if you look at that kind of pattern and ask yourself, what's happening in Europe, you're seeing, companies coming out of Finland, Croatia, Spain, Ireland. There's, 2 Irish startups in a small town that Mike Butcher went to, that there's no more than 3,000 people living in the town. There's one guy who built a tech company previously, and he won't move out of that town. He's building another company. He just has him and his private jet flying around the world persuading engineers to relocate to this tiny town in the southwest of Ireland. Why? Because he knows he can build a big company from a very remote area, and I think he's entirely right, and that's what's changed. And I think in Europe, I'm not worried about big clusters like Silicon Valley not existing. It doesn't matter, because people can build companies in Croatia like Nordeus, or like Supercell in Finland. There's so many other examples.
What was the name again of the company, this guy?
So StockByte sold to Getty Images for 150 million in cash about 5 or 6 years ago, and he owned the company 100%. Wow. And he built it from a tiny village in the southwest of Ireland. And now he's building another company, and one of his former employees has started another company called Alto Bridge, and that deploys mobile networks in remote or war-torn areas. And it was a technology pioneer at the World Economic Forum last year. Amazing. And this is a farming village in the most remote part of Ireland imaginable, but there's a private runway about 3 miles from these 2 startups. Mike Butcher has been there, so I'm not making this stuff up.
We'll testify later. Great. So it's possible in Europe. Definitely it's possible. Zaryn, what's going on with this European Commission? I read this manifesto for entrepreneurship. You involved, there is like a entrepreneurs club, or I don't remember the exact name. What's going on? Could be something interesting?
Yeah, so it's a recently new initiative we started. I think we've been talking to the European Commission for a while now, and in particular Neelie Kroes. And over the last year, I think that across Europe you've seen a change in sentiment, right? And you've seen in different governments. Last night we were listening, and today we've listened to some people from the Italian government talking about the importance of this new digital economy. Similar things have been happening in Spain. Similar things have been happening in Germany. And about a year ago, we started talking with Neelie Kroes and the European Commission about how can we, at a European level, try to create a consistent set of recommendations, a manifesto, an aspirational goal for where we want to take Europe in terms of how we can evolve society, how we can evolve education, taxation, the role of the European Union in Europe to improve the conditions and the environment, to create more startups, to create more entrepreneurs, to create more people that would think about joining a startup, whether it's starting one or working in one or investing in one. And so a group of entrepreneurs, we've been to Brussels quite a few times. We met with Neelie. We drafted a manifesto and collaborated with other groups too, Brent Hoberman and Founders Forum. And many others have been helpful, and we've just been trying. We've created about 5 main points that covers primarily education and how we need to change education, change the role of teachers, change the way that we introduce digital resources into classrooms, the way we incentivize students to participate in this digital economy. We have recommendations around the economy, around financing startup companies, taxation of options, and the way you treat options and stock for employees so that you can incentivize people to take stock grants, because in many countries in Europe, it's very complicated to do that. We have recommendations around creating a kind of policy role at the European level and every country level to push these goals. We have recommendations around a consistency for data protection and privacy across all of Europe. And so there's a number of issues that we're bringing up, and we're trying to create a consistent approach across all the European countries so that Europe can act together. Sorry, one more important one is hiring as well, creating more consistent policies around hiring. So, you know, these are things that we're pushing for, and we think are really positive to make Europe more competitive with the United States, more competitive with Asia.
A few years ago, Jeff Bezos came in Italy, and I did this interview with Jeff Bezos, and I had Jeff there, so I couldn't resist. And I said, okay, Jeff, how do you predict the future? You know, because he always speaks about, I think, you know, in 10 years, in 15 years, and Amazon is an amazing, successful story. So his answer was very simple. He said, I focus on what will not change. Very simple. So consumers still, in 10 years, they will want cheaper product, they will want good customer service and so on. So what do you think, what do you see in 10 years, 5 years, 10 years for Europe, Paddy? From all the signals of everything that is happening in Europe, what do you think will happen in 5, 10 years? Is something that, you know, Europe will become really the next amazing tech hub? Will more or less remain the same balance? What's your opinion?
Yeah, I really think it will. You know, I think, you know, it's only really recently that, you know, companies in Europe can get access to capital on much more favorable terms, for example. And I think that's going to help, you know, drive a new wave of huge global European technology companies. But not only that, I think there's some very basic statistical differences between the United States and their education system and Europe and its education system. So right now in the United States, for example, they churn out a lot of engineers and mathematicians and computer scientists. But if you compare it to most countries in Europe, even a country like Ireland, per capita, churns out 50% more graduates in engineering, computing, and mathematics. And that trend holds across most of Europe. We're really good at actually educating a lot of people. In the United States, they're really good at having about this many really good schools, and the rest of them are pretty shit. In Europe, we actually have some incredible schools for engineering all over Europe. And I think at scale, that begins to matter over time. There's an incredible amount of talent in Europe, and our governments are prepared to invest in basic infrastructure that helps lower the cost of doing business. And I don't think that's happening in the United States. They're entering into a very critically dangerous moment for their, I think, the future of their education system that's incredibly costly, is not producing the amount of talent, and now they're rushing as fast as they can to change their immigration system so that they can attract more talent into the United States. I think Europe is very differently placed, and I think that puts us in a very good position.
That's a good point, I think. Zaryn, how would you see Europe in a few years?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Europe has an incredible potential, and you know, my opinion, you know, I agree that, you know, there's so many differences between the United States and Europe that I don't think, you know, we could be here all day if we wanted to make a list of all of them. But I think that, you know, if I could really summarize it into one really big kind of idea, I think there's a cultural difference between Europe and the United States, where I think that in the U.S. you have a lot more people that have this kind of can-do attitude, that they think that, you know, there's things need to be done and they can do it, right? And I think that in Europe in general, you know, particularly Southern Europe, and I see it in Spain, and we work with a lot of young people in Spain, it's just this kind of, people don't feel empowered to make changes themselves or to do it themselves, or that they can participate in that change, right? There's very much a sense that the society or the government needs to take care of them or needs to do it for them. Whereas in the United States, there's very much an attitude of, you know, we're just going to do it, you know, we're going to get it done. And I think that that's a shift that, you know, I think that there's a lot of changes we need to make, and that's why with the Startup Manifesto, we've listed a lot of different things we think we need to improve. But there's a bigger kind of cultural shift where, you know, there's a reason, like, the little kid in the classroom in the United States really believes he can be an astronaut or the president of the United States. And, you know, I think to some extent in Europe, we need to inspire young people to let them know that they can really be whatever they want to be. They can participate in the new digital economy. And I think the examples of successful companies that we're seeing, you know, the 900-something startups that are participating in Dublin Web Summit, you know, this is already a big difference versus 5 years ago. And I think whether it's the big companies like Skype or Spotify or Tuenti or Rovio or any of these companies. I think there's just so many more companies that are making an example out of that success that I think that's going to help to kind of tip the scales and push Europe more in that direction.
Guys, a couple of minutes more, and then I'll let you go and we go for lunch. Paddy, what's your best tip for people running a startup in this moment in Italy? They probably launched it here. If you have your number one tip that a friend of yours is coming to you and say, Paddy, tell me one thing that I have to focus on, what would be?
Don't listen to anybody else. Just,
right.
I think, I've seen, it's very, very easy to be swayed by every expert, every guy who's been doing it for 20 years. But it's unlikely they know more about your specific sector than you do. And at the end of the day, I think you've got to back yourself. And it's so easy when you're 22 or 23 or 24 in particular, you're doing your first company, somebody comes along, he's 45, 50 years of age. I'm not ageist or anything. And he gives you all the advice and he tells you exactly what you should do. I think you should just be so careful about that. I've seen so often young entrepreneurs taking advice from people they feel should know better, but in reality, they don't really know better. You should definitely take their advice on board, but be very careful about following that advice.
Follow your way. Yeah. Zaryn, your number one tip?
I think that it's a long ride creating a company, and anybody who's been successful has probably had, more than one failure along the way. I certainly have, and I think that there's just one thing that is more important than anything else. Someone told me a long time ago, they said persistence breaks resistance, and I think you just have to be incredibly, incredibly persistent and be a bulldozer and push things forward, because even the most successful people, confront challenges every day.
Persistent break resistance. If it's in Creative Commons, I will use it, again. I love it. Guys, thank you so much. Zaryn, Dentzel, Paddy, Cosgrave, thank you so much. Thank you, guys. Thanks. All right.